It's Saturday, July 5th, 2025, and Tropical Depression 3, soon to be Tropical Storm Chantal, has formed off the eastern coast of Florida. And right here in its current state, we can see a lot of convection occurring out here, which is signifying a organizing trend. The Storm Prediction Center's cone of uncertainty has it going from anywhere from the southeastern corner of South Carolina all the way up to the southeastern corner of North Carolina. And it has it landfalling in central South Carolina at 8 a.m. on Sunday as a weak tropical storm. Now, our spaghetti models have pretty much zeroed in on a central South Carolina impact with a couple straying all the way up into the northeastern corner of the state. And our intensity models have pretty much agreed that this will be a tropical storm before it makes landfall in South Carolina, and then it will decrease in intensity as it goes over the land, and then we could see a possible re-intensification as it goes back out into the Atlantic. Another thing to note is that although the storm is currently slated to make landfall around 2 a.m. on early Sunday morning, that means that tropical storm force winds could possibly impact the state much earlier, starting around Saturday at 2 p.m. Now, currently our sea surface temperatures right out here in our intensification area are going to be very primed for intensification of this system. And then we also have a little pocket of a higher ocean heat content right here where our storm is going to track and intensify, which would actually be pretty conducive for more organization. Now, our storm out here is going to be dealing with a pretty moist air mass. The blue is going to be the moist air, and the more brownish orange is going to be the dry air, but it will be battling some dry air as it tries to make landfall. As we get closer to landfall, it will suck up some dry air, which will hinder its intensification, and is one of the reasons why it's not really expected to become any stronger than a weak tropical storm. Another thing in which our storm will be battling is an area of pretty high amounts of shear, which will not be conducive at all for this storm to form, and is yet another reason why this storm is not expected to become more than a weak tropical storm. And then today we have an interesting V-shaped risk of severe weather in the United States, stretching down from parts of the northern plains into the Midwest and Great Lakes region. And our main risk of severe weather is going to be out here with a slight risk up in the northern plains. Today's risk is going to be mostly a wind risk with widespread 5% risk areas of severe winds stretching down all the way from the southern plains, Great Lakes region, and then up into the northern plains with a 15% chance of severe winds up here in the northern plains. And our risk of hail is going to be pretty much entirely isolated to the plains, which stretches all the way down from the southern plains all the way up into the northern plains with a 15% risk of hail. And lastly, we have a small isolated area of some tornado potential. We have a 2% slight risk tornadoes up here in the northern plains. Here's our simulated reflectivity from the northern plains, and I want you to look right here on the Montana and Wyoming border, and right here is where we're going to have a isolated tornado potential with a couple of discrete storms which will likely be able to get organized, and this will be around the mid to late afternoon, and these will bring the threats of all hazards of severe weather before they turn into mostly a line of storms closer to sunset, which would be mostly a wind threat. Looking a bit more south into our central and southern plains risk area, we do see a couple of areas of possibly some isolated organized storms around late afternoon to sunset, one being up here in Kansas and one being down into the Texas and Oklahoma panhandle, and these will both likely hold the threat of severe winds and possibly the risk of some small hail. And our last area of interest is going to be the Midwest. Up here, we're going to see a couple of rounds of storms starting all the way in around midday. And these are going to be associated with a remnant low left behind by a mesoscale convective system and another low, which is going to be up here near the USA-Canada border. And what this is going to do, this is going to fuel a couple of rounds of storms along with a cold front, which will stretch all the way from the Canadian border across into the South Plains. And these storms will hold mostly the threat for severe winds with the threat of some very small hail, but it's unlikely. And there is a bit more tornado potential up here in northeastern Wisconsin. Here are 500 millibar winds, and we can see pretty clearly our two dips in the jet stream, which will be causing our severe weather. One out here in the Midwest, we see a short wave moving through the region, bringing some of that large scale forcing for our storms. And we see another short wave, which is going to push through the Rockies out into the northern plains, which will also help to provide forcing for our storms out there, along with some organizing shear. Then we have a high pressure system down here in the lower Rockies to upper plains, which will help to bring some organizing shear for our storms in this region initiated along our high plains convergence zone. Here's a weather sounding from our main risk area in the northern plains, and we can see that we do have a bit of curving in our hodograph And this is going to be coupled with some low level helicity, low level shear, but we do see quite a bit of bulk shear. So definitely a couple of organized storms with some strong updrafts out here expected in the northern plains. We also see some veering in our winds, which will also help to make those updrafts strong. And we see a bit of cape up here near our freezing layer and decent lapse rates at 7.9 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. So that is one of the reasons why that threat for hail could be realized. We do see what will be enough moisture for our upper plains region to support that threat for all hazards of severe weather. Then we do see some decent low level lapse rates, which could possibly increase that threat of severe winds. Our cape is going to be pretty decent at 2,000 joules per kilogram, so definitely a somewhat juiced up atmosphere. Our precipitable water is not going to be super high at only 1.05 inches, and our downdraft cape is going to be pretty low. So that will hinder that threat of severe winds a bit. But because these storms are expected to be pretty organized, I definitely think it will be realized. Our lowest cloud level is going to be a bit high to support a really robust tornado threat, but because these storms are expected to be super organized and have a discrete nature, that is why there is that 2% conditional risk out there in this region. So in summary, I think the northern plains could definitely see all hazards of severe weather today. Here's a weather sounding from a tad bit more south into the central and southern plains. We see a pretty straight elongated photograph with pretty much no low level helicity and no low level shear. But we do see a bit of bulk shear nearing 30 knots, which would be below that 40 knot threshold, but possibly enough for some storms to get organized. We do see some weak veering in our winds, which would also help with organized storms. We also see some decent mid-level lapse rates around 7.9 Celsius decreasing per kilometer, which could help to fuel that threat for small hail. We also see really high temperatures and pretty solid low-level lapse rates and higher LCLs, which could support that threat for severe winds. However, we don't see a whole lot of moisture, which will be one of the hindering factors for these storms. And that is going to be coupled with not a whole lot of juice in our atmosphere. We are going to see 1,000 cape, which is enough for thunderstorms, but definitely not a whole lot, which will also probably hinder that threat of severe weather. We do see a pretty decent bit of precipitable water at 1.01 inches, although that's not super large. But our downdraft cape is going to be 1,700, so that is a reason why some severe winds are probably expected out here in the central and southern plains today. Our last weather sounding is going to be from the Midwest, and our photograph is going to be very interesting, but we do see some curving and a lot of some shear in our low levels. Our low level helicity is going to be approaching 100, and our low level shear is going to be nearing 16. And then we are going to see a decent bit of bulk shear at around 33. Our lowest cloud level is going to be low. So coupled with our shear, that is a reason why I think we could see a sneaky tornado threat up in the northern Midwest. Our low level lapse rates are going to be very conducive for a threat of severe winds. We're also going to have a very moist air mass, which would support that threat for severe winds and possibly some tornadoes. Now, our freezing layer is going to be very high, and our lapse rates are going to be pretty low in the mid levels at only 6 Celsius decreasing per kilometer. So that threat for hail out here is going to be pretty much zero. We do see some dry air loft, which could also help to support that threat of severe winds. Then we see a decent bit of cape, which would help to support that threat for severe winds and possibly a weak tornado or two. And also our 3 cape is going to be extremely high, nearing 300 at 270, which would also help to support that threat of severe winds and possibly a tornado. So in summary, I think in the Midwest, we could see a bit of a sneaky tornado threat. But the main threat out here is going to be severe winds, and it's mostly going to be hindered by a very messy storm mode out here in this region.